a lot going on at this symposium. There'll be a couple of poster sessions. We're going to talk about the work across the Cancer Center. I am also going to be presenting a Legacy Award tomorrow, so hang around for that. It will be at lunchtime. And I also just wanted to thank all of the sponsors who are helping make this possible, as well as the audience. So we have several platinum level sponsors, including Caris Life Sciences, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Asai, so we appreciate their support and being able to put this together. So I'm always really thrilled to be able to do this talk, and I'm also faced this with a lot of trepidation because I am absolutely positive I'm going to miss some things I should have said, probably about your work, so you know who you are. I'm talking to you, so if I don't mention your name, please don't take it out personally on me. But at any rate, I really did want to start with a big thank you to the Masonic Cancer Center members. This has been a really challenging past 2 years, and I want to thank you for your resilience and commitment and enthusiasm. And so I could say those words, but then I should prove to you that you have been working as hard as you can in these challenging times, so I'll do that. I recognize that grant funding and research dollars is not the only metric of how hard you're working, how dedicated you are to the work that we do. But I should point out that since the past 5 years, our total dollar amount for research funding has been growing. The big lion's share of that has been in this blue bar, which is NIH funded and NCI funded. So you know, those are not easy to come by. You also know, even though many of those grants go to the single investigator, it's not the single investigator who's responsible for increased cancer research. It's the entire team of researchers, students, postdocs, staff, everybody. So I want to thank all of you, and I think you guys ought to be congratulated for doing a really good job during these trying times. So I actually was thinking about giving this talk last year, and the reason last year was important, and everybody, this is a picture from Jumanji, if you all remember Jumanji, when they find Robin Williams out there in the jungle, he doesn't know what year it is. Last year was a landmark year for a couple of reasons. One reason was it was the 30th anniversary of the Masonic Cancer Center, when we were officially recognized by the Board of Regents as the university's official cancer center. So last year was like a lost year, so let's just pretend this was 2021 and pretend it's our 30th anniversary. The other part about last year that was important is that in 1971, President Nixon signed then what was called the National Cancer Act and put aside $1.6 billion to really strengthen the National Cancer Institute. This has commonly been called the war on cancer, and in some ways I wish it was a year ago, because a year ago war was an abstraction. So I don't mean to trivialize what war really is, but that has been commonly referred to as what this bill was about. So first, you can think a lot of things about President Nixon. This is one of the good things he did for us. I want to comment that in 1971, $1.6 billion is worth about $11.3 billion today, if you account for inflation. Does anybody know what the president's asked the budget is for this year? Anyway, the NCI appropriation this year is about $6.5 billion. So there's good parts and bad parts, but at any rate, this is my only political statement for today. We've done a great job with restricted funding, I think, over many years. So that was a war on cancer. Many people said this was naive and it was too early in 1971. So this is an article that appeared about in 1997, about 25 years ago, that was really Cancer Undefeated. So the idea was from Dr. Bailar and Gornick is that the war against cancer is far from over. Observed changes in mortality is due to primarily changing incidence and early detection. The effect of new treatments has been largely disappointing. So that was kind of a not great thing to have 25 years ago. So I would like to say over the course of the time that this has changed dramatically, and we'll talk about how it's changed. So first off, what does a win look like? So I think you would want fewer cancer diagnoses. That would be a win. You want fewer cancer deaths. I think that should be obvious. You want to improve the quality of life for cancer survivors, because it's not a victory if you the feet cancer, but leave people with significant toxicities and side effects. And finally, you want to eliminate cancer disparities. So what I'd like to do for the rest of my time is talk a little bit, and I'm going to take a broad historical look on how members of the Masonic Cancer Center have contributed to these. And again, this is the part where I know I forgot your work, so you can tell me about it later. So this is just basically trends in cancer, and we've seen this graph before. It shows you the most striking decrease in cancer incidence is lung and bronchus, more striking in men than it is in women, but the same incidence is occurring. So I think it should be over the 30-year span of the Masonic Cancer Center and the 50-year span of the National Cancer Act, we should think about how this happened and the contributions from our center. So I think Steve Heck's work and his group identified that there were tobacco-specific carcinogens in combusted tobacco products. I think some of us, at least I'm old enough to know, when you would see panels of tobacco company executives stand up and testify to Congress, it was just an association between smoking and lung cancer. That, of course, seems incredibly ridiculous now. But the science proved that there were tobacco-specific carcinogens inducted to DNA associated with mutations associated with the disease. So even the tobacco companies had to give up. We now know that's a problem, so we have a role of nicotine and nicotine metabolism in smoking. Dr. Hatsukami showed through a study group that low nicotine cigarettes facilitate quitting, which then opens the door for the FDA to regulate nicotine levels. And Dr. Murphy and her team identified metabolism of nicotine associated with cancer risk. This is important because it then turns into policy. The demonstration of tobacco-specific carcinogens and passive exposure was important to create the Freedom to Breathe Act in the state of Minnesota. And Dr. Hatsukami and I wrote a letter to President Kaler in 2013 arguing that the university should be a tobacco-free campus. He came back and said, he's a scientist, he said, what's the evidence for that? Dr. Hatsukami spit out like 5 pages of manuscripts that showed him that this was in fact true, and that's why we're a tobacco-free campus now. This work continues, even though I'm going to show you this date, it says 2011. It is an article about a report to the FDA about menthol cigarettes and public health, review of scientific evidence and recommendations. This was the esteemed panel who led this report, and I just circled this because the print is small. Dr. Hatsukami had an important role in crafting this report in 2011. The FDA is a slow machine, but you might have seen this in the local news. This is the article from the New York Times, where the FDA moves to ban sales of menthol cigarettes. And the statement, at least in the byline of this New York Times article, was that public health experts say the proposal could save hundreds of thousands of lives, especially among Black smokers, 85% of whom use menthol products. So there's a health equity component to tobacco control too, and I think that's an extremely important aspect to recognize. And even though it can take years to affect change that we want to affect, it's always important to have the science behind it. So we're known for tobacco control, but we do more than that. We have recently, under the leadership shown here, Dr. Stepanov, Hatsukami, and Gebre, have created the Institute for Global Cancer Prevention Research. The mission is shown here. I'm not going to read the mission entirely, but it really is the idea that the significant expertise within our university needs to be exported globally to attack problems where we can. Remember the name, Dr. Gebre. I will speak about her again a little bit later. So the IGCPR's focus areas around tobacco control. I should mention this is a collaboration with the School of Public Health as well. Environmental causes of cancer, as well as infectious agents in cancer. So I know a lot of people in the room are probably interested in these areas and probably interested in studying an international population. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the leadership as well as look at the website to become involved. There are other environmental exposures too. Drs. Tereski and Balbo, and you'll hear from Dr. Balbo a little bit later, study kidney DNA adductomics in terms of what's stuck to your kidney cancers. We also have recently funded the 10,000 Families Cohort, which is a new study to understand environmental causes of cancer. Drs. Pointer, Nelson, and Peterson are responsible for this work. In this 10,000 Family Studies, 10,000 Family Study Cohort, we're interested in looking at specific cancers more associated with the state of Minnesota. There's an increase in hematologic malignancy in our state compared to others. So the question is this an environmental exposure or not? This population will be studied, as well as exposures to common potential carcinogens in our environment, radon, PFAS, which is the Teflon material that never goes away, and glyphosate, which is the Roundup, shown in the little spray kit picture here, and we can measure levels of exposure. We can then create a study design, or they're going to create a study design as a family-based cohort across multiple generations. So I started with the tobacco story as a way to reduce cancer incidence. If we understand what's in our environment, hopefully we can come to that as well. So let's turn a little bit to, are we doing better in terms of overall mortality? So these are data from the American Cancer Society. So I said a win would look like the overall incidence would decrease. And, you know, I think we need to understand in some areas we're doing fabulously well. In some areas we're not preventing people from getting cancer. And the term prevention has a couple of different meanings to it. And I'll just put a plug in for Dr. Essman's next talk about primary prevention around screening, or secondary prevention around screening. But if you look at mortality in terms of death rates from cancer, there is a distinct downward trend over the past several years. Everybody who looks at this graph can interpret it differently. One interpretation is, okay, fine, that's going slow. I think everybody in the room has recognized that cancer is a disease. There are many multiple diseases with multiple causes and drivers. I'm a breast cancer oncologist, so I know there are probably 10-ish subtypes of breast cancer. So I don't think that we can bend this curve a little more steeply unless we have a deeper understanding of what's going on with the tumors. I want to go back and just sort of establish why we're here in many ways. B.J. Kennedy was kind of the first person who established that cancer medicine, not just surgery and radiation, was an important component to cancer treatment. He certainly founded many of the aspects of what we do today, or what I do today as a medical oncologist, and I'll say a few more words about him a little bit later. We've had a team, Drs. Good, Kersey, Crivet, Ramsey, McGlave, who really established the concept that allogeneic transplantation of bone marrow worked in refractory hematologic malignancy. I think my colleagues, and my bone marrow colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think my bone marrow colleagues have begun to learn that what they're doing in many ways is adoptive chemotherapy. And these two thoughts, medical therapy for common solid tumors and adoptive therapy from cellular products, can be knitted together. I wanted to show you one study that is ongoing here at the university. This is spearheaded by Emil Liu, but it is a colorectal trial right at the moment. The principle is the metastatic site is taken out. It is divided. TIL cells go to the molecular and cellular therapies facility. The tumor cells goes to the Moriarty lab, where they're looking for mutations. At the same time, the cellular therapies lab is expanding T cells, identifying reactive T cell clones, and then CRISPR knocking out the gene called CISH, which enhances T cell activation to put a gene-modified TIL cell back into the patient. I wanted to point this out because really you can only do this study here, I think. In fact, the sponsors of this study brought it here because we had all the necessary expertise to do this, particularly the collaboration between the Moriarty lab and the molecular and cellular therapeutics facility. We've done well on this trial in terms of accruing. We're going to expand this to non-small cell lung cancer, again, another disease that needs better therapies. So I think I'm excited to bring this world together, or to see people bring this world together of cellular therapies and solid tumors. This is a cartoon from the Miller Lab. I think everybody that has seen Jeff's talks is aware that he's been a foundational leader in using natural killer cells as a therapy. In particular, the idea that you can obtain pluripotent stem cells to turn them into natural killer cells and perhaps create off-the-shelf NK cells. So one of the challenges of the strategy I just showed you was isolating TILs, growing them up, gene modifying them. But if you could identify a pathway where you could use natural killer cells to use this as an off-the-shelf way, that would be an advance. And I know, I put Miller et al., I know there are a lot of people in the room, Dr. Bacanova, Dr. Geller, who are working with him on these products, but they're exciting in the sense that we may be able to bring cellular therapies into a more common medical practice. Recognizing the strength in developmental therapeutics, we've launched our developmental therapeutics program. This is Dr. Fujioka and Dr. Patil on the cover of Minnesota Monthly, recognized as top doctors because of establishment of this clinic. We established a weekly clinic focused on early phase clinical trials. We increased capacity by opening studies on the clinical research unit, which is a unit that is jointly operated by the hospital and by University of Minnesota physicians. And we're building a dedicated care team providers of APPs and MDs for program expansion and coverage. I actually think this is where we should lead as a medical center. One, for the basic scientists in the room, to be able to translate your work into early phase clinical trials in humans. And secondly, to concentrate on new and exciting therapies that may not be available elsewhere. So I think we're making advances in therapies. At the same time, because of that, we are also seeing more cancer survivors. Currently, there are 16.9 million cancer survivors, expected to increase by 31% by 2030. Again, a testament to the work that we are all doing around improving therapies. But at the same time, this generates another set of problems or concerns for the long-term health of cancer survivors. Dr. Blaze took on the position of Cancer Research Survivorship Services and Translational Research at the Cancer Center. You may know Dr. Blaze, she's also interim division chief of hematology, oncology, and transplant. But chugging along through the pandemic, she first created in April 2021 a Cancer Center Survivorship Research Forum, which was meant for investigators, which was meant to be hosted here, which unfortunately turned into a virtual event. Dr. Ann and I had talked about this, well, should we do it again? And Ann said, yes, we should do it again, but let's do it somewhere else. So it'll come back here at some point. She also had in person, just recently, the Survivorship Conference, which is directed towards patients. So we've had a strong survivorship presence in the program specs, screening, prevention, etiology, and cancer survivorship. Childhood cancer has been a hallmark of our colleagues in pediatric oncology. We have a presence in cardio-oncology, both at the clinical and basic level. We have melanoma and gynonc survivorship studies ongoing, mostly home in gynecologic oncology by Dr. Vogel. And there's a growing interest in sexual and gender minorities, particularly gay and bisexual men, in terms of prostate cancer as well as oral pharyngeal cancers and how they're managed and approached. So again, I think this is one of the wins, and I think we're contributing. I want to say something about what we have to address, I think as a society as well as a cancer center, is the disparities in cancer mortality based on race and socioeconomic status. So these are overall mortality curves in prostate cancer and breast cancer. And first off, if I didn't show you the legends, and I said, guess what these are, I think most people would probably identify this. Black men in both poor and affluent counties have a dramatically worse outcome from prostate cancer than white men in poor and affluent counties. At the same time, women show a very similar trend, that Black women generally do worse than white women. And here, I didn't show all the graphs that were included in this report. I encourage you to look at it if you want to see this, but here the effect of poor and affluent counties is not as dramatic as there are in some other diseases. But certainly, these disparities make progress in cancer a little bit less robust or rigorous, if you will, if the progress we make doesn't extend to everybody. So how are we going to address that as a cancer center? We want to improve outcomes by addressing healthcare disparities. So we've created two newish structures. One is an Office of Community Outreach and Engagement. The other is Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. I'll say a few more words about both of those. We also have the Minnesota Cancer Clinical Trials Network, which is designed to engage our rural populations and engage underrepresented groups and communities in the metro areas. So just to say a word about outcomes and addressing health disparities through the Community Outreach Engagement Office. The mission, as I said here, reduce the burden of cancer in Minnesota by engaging communities and providing them access to knowledge and information about cancer prevention, treatment, survivorship, and clinical research opportunities. It's led by Ms. Ellis, Drs. Pointer and Pratt. One of the things that the NCI is exactly right about is we should all be thinking about what we do and how our science engages the community. And I think the office here of Community Outreach Engagement is responsible for a couple things. One of them is pointing out where our disparities are. And secondly is helping us in our science identify how we can begin to address these particular disparities. Because again, I don't think we've defeated cancer unless everybody benefits equally. The other opportunity is through the new Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I mentioned Dr. Gebri before. She has been willing to take on the job as the Associate Director, but the mission is to create a culture of diversity and inclusion as we continue to work towards solving the problem of cancer. And I need to say a word about this because all of us are involved in this particular issue. Because as we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, it is not just the patients we serve. It's the leadership of the Cancer Center, it's the faculty we hire, it's the staffing, it's everybody throughout the organization, making sure that we represent a diverse population, because we know the other thing I showed you about worse outcomes might have been changed if we had more voices at the table all the way through the mechanism. I think this will be an important aspect of us going forward. And then finally, I think you know about, hopefully, the Minnesota Cancer Clinical Trials Network. It is a mission to improve cancer outcomes for all Minnesotans through greater access to cancer clinical trials and prevention and treatment. We have engaged the other groups within our state that do clinical research, particularly, and you can't see it here, our hospital system, Fairview, the Mayo Clinic, Metro Minnesota Oncology, which covers mostly the Twin Cities area, Essentia in Duluth, as well as Sanford. I know Sanford's not technically in our state, but they cover the western half of our state. And the reason we put this together is we wanted to make sure that clinical trials available at many of these partner sites are available for all the sites that we see. We always talk about the prototypical site is Thief River Falls. Thief River Falls may have an oncology practice, may have subjects at risk for cancer. So how do we bring clinical trials to them? And that's what we really did with this mechanism. And Ms. Ronnie actually manages that. And I think, again, take a look at that site. There's a lot to offer there for any of our investigators who want to engage human subjects throughout the state. I will also note, you will also note on this map, there's a little hole around St. Cloud. We are working, or have been working, to try to get CentraCare into the fold in St. Cloud, but that's an ongoing process. So if we think about where we've been, then we have to ask what's next. I am not going to cover up the fact that the past 2 years were very difficult for a lot of us. We have lost a lot of faculty and staff. It's understandable. You might have, this has been termed the Great Resignation area. If you read Paul Krugman's article a couple of weeks ago, he called it the Great Reshuffling. People are all working, they're just doing different things. And so we need to put procedures as well as pay, quite frankly, in place to retain and recruit and reward faculty and staff. We also need to submit and renew the Cancer Center Support Grant. I know that there are a handful of people in this room who are worried about that, and that's due in January 2023. I think one of the things you'll see, hopefully, assuming the Board of Regents signs off on this, is we are going to develop and begin a statewide clinical trials educational campaign via the Minnesota Cancer Clinical Trials Network. I think one of the things that was brought out in a very bright spotlight in the past couple of years is the ability of the general public to understand clinical research and science. And of course, I'm talking about COVID and vaccinations and medicines. We as a community have not done a great job of explaining how we make advances in certain diseases, and we really want to pitch that within the state as well. We will continue ongoing recruitment of new faculty. There are several irons in the fire, I think maybe 10 irons in the fire, so that's exciting too. And then finally, through the areas we talked about, we want to build strong partnerships with our community through the outreach and engagement, as well as through diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's the end of my remarks. I wanted to actually thank the planning committee Their names are listed here. And as I looked at the planning committee, I said, oh, I forgot to talk about a lot of people. So I forgot to say much about Hormel, who are key partners within this process with us, and they're part of the Cancer Clinical Trials Network. I forgot to talk about Emmanuel Antonarakis, who is our new Associate Director for Translational Research and received a big grant recently from the DoD to start a prostate cancer clinical trials network. I want to point out specifically Max, who you will be seeing throughout the day, who's not listed on there, and Alyssa Martinez-Hubner, who really put the logistics together for this trial. So thanks for all of the committee members for putting this together.